The diesel engine ticked as it cooled, each metallic ping loud in the 12-degree stillness. Vernon Hayes sat in his truck across from the Victorian house, watching his breath cloud the windshield. Frozen branches scraped the siding like fingernails on a chalkboard. Salt stains crusted his leather boots. Through the lit upstairs window, he could see her, Claudia, reading in the chair by the lamp, the same chair she'd sat in 20 years ago when he'd told her Nashville needed him more than she did. He pulled the envelope from his coat pocket, stepped out into air so cold it burned his lungs, and walked to the porch. The brass door knocker hung tarnished, unused. He left the envelope against the weathered wood and retreated. Inside his truck, he watched her descend the stairs, open the door. She read the note. "This was always yours. V," and tore it in half. Her eyes found his through the frost-rimmed window. The porch light went dark. 20 minutes, he sat there, unmoving. She kept the deed, though. He'd watched her fold it carefully, set it on the hall table. Why? The call came at 7 the next morning. Vernon was in his Knoxville hotel room staring at coffee he hadn't touched when his phone buzzed against the nightstand. "Dad." Tommy's voice came through tight, clipped. "I got a foreclosure notice yesterday." Vernon sat up straighter. The radiator hissed in the corner, pushing dry heat into the room. "What kind of notice?" "The kind that says I have 60 days to pay $47,000 in back taxes or they take the farm." Papers rustled on Tommy's end. "I called to ask if you knew a good lawyer, not to ask for money, not to have a conversation about why you're back in town bothering Mom." "Tommy, I don't want your help, Dad. I want a referral." A pause. "Beth saw your truck outside Mom's house yesterday morning. You left something on her porch." Vernon rubbed his eyes. Through the window, Knoxville's downtown spread gray and cold under a colorless sky. "It's complicated. It's always complicated with you." Tommy exhaled slowly. "Marty Keller still practice law?" "He does." "Then I'll call him myself." The line went dead. Vernon set the phone down, picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He dumped it in the sink, watching brown liquid swirl down the drain, and thought about the surveyor's compass in his truck's glove box. His grandfather's, brass and weighted, the needle always pointing true even when he didn't. 40 miles south in Hollow Ridge, Claudia sat at her desk in the office she shared with Beth, the deed spread flat beneath her mother's reading glasses. The bone china teacup at her elbow had gone cold an hour ago, but she kept her hands wrapped around it anyway, feeling the smooth porcelain like a tether. "You kept it." Beth stood in the doorway, coat still on, snow melting off her boots onto the hardwood. Claudia didn't look up. "It's a legal document." "It's a gesture." Beth crossed to the desk, leaned over to read. "Property deed, Riverside parcels, lots 14 through 18. She straightened. "What's on that property that Vernon wants you to have?" The radiator clanked. Outside, someone scraped ice off a windshield, the sound sharp and rhythmic. Claudia touched the edge of the deed, her mother's land. The land First Trust Bank had taken in 2004, when her mother couldn't make the payments, when the cancer treatments had bled them dry, and the paperwork had piled up, and somehow, impossibly, a signature had appeared on a loan modification her mother swore she'd never signed. "Everything," Claudia whispered. Beth pulled up a chair. "Meaning?" "Meaning it was my mother's. Meaning the bank took it. Meaning Vernon spent God knows how much money buying it back piece by piece." She finally looked at Beth. "But why now? Why after 5 years of silence does he show up with this?" "Maybe he found something. Or maybe he wants something." Claudia pushed the deed away, picked up her calendar. The page showed February, but her pen had circled a date in March, May 15th, tax deadline, Tommy's farm. She'd been planning to help Tommy herself. She had the money, barely, but she had it, and now Vernon was back, and the timing felt like a trap or a rescue, and she couldn't tell which. Beth touched her shoulder. "You going to call him?" "No." "You going to throw the deed away?" Claudia folded it carefully, placed it in her desk drawer beneath the quarterly reports and the retirement account statements. "No." "Then what?" "Then I'm going to find out what he's really after." She stood, carrying her cold tea to the small kitchen. Because Vernon Hayes doesn't do anything without a reason, and whatever his reason is, it's not love. Through the window, the town square sat frozen and still. The courthouse steps needed salt. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly through the morning gray. This town, her town now, not theirs, had watched her rebuild herself one client at a time, one careful investment at a time, One morning, she didn't think about him at a time. And now he was back. Beth appeared beside her. You know, Tommy called me last night, said he got a foreclosure notice. Claudia's hand tightened on the cup. When? Yesterday, same day Vernon showed up. The pieces didn't fit yet, but they would. Claudia had spent 20 years learning to read financial documents, to spot the gaps in paperwork, to see what people tried to hide in the fine print. Vernon was hiding something, and she was going to find it. She set the teacup in the sink where it rattled against the stainless steel. Get me everything you can on Vernon's real estate holdings, she said, and find out who owns First Trust Bank now. Vernon pushed open the diner door at noon, and the bell above it chimed too loud in the sudden quiet. Every head turned. The smell of grease and coffee hit him first, then the weight of 20 pairs of eyes. He crossed to the counter, boots tracking slush across the black and white tile. Earl, who'd served him coffee every Saturday for 15 years before the divorce, stood behind the register counting bills. Coffee, Earl. Black. Earl didn't look up, kept counting. Then he picked up the pot, walked down the counter, and set a cup at the far end. Slid it toward Vernon, without meeting his eyes. The ceramic scraped linoleum. Vernon stood there, hand halfway to his wallet. Behind him someone whispered. He caught the words, sniffing around Claudia. He took the cup, left a $5 bill, and turned to find a booth. Ray Dunbar stood in the doorway. 69 years old, still built like the linebacker he'd been in high school. Silver hair combed sharp. He wore a wool coat that probably cost more than Earl's monthly take. His eyes found Vernon and didn't blink. Vernon Hayes, Ray's voice carried to every corner. Surprised you'd show your face. Vernon stayed still. The coffee burned his palm through the cup. Ray walked closer, stopped 3 feet away. Heard you've been leaving presents on people's porches? That's some kind of hobby rich men take up when they get lonely? Someone laughed. A fork clinked against a plate. Just visiting, Ray. Visiting. Ray smiled without warmth. That what we're calling it, because Claudia looked real happy to see you, I'm sure. He turned to address the diner. Vernon here abandoned his wife to chase money in Nashville. Built himself an empire buying and selling dirt. Now he's back. Anyone want to guess why? Vernon set the coffee down on the nearest table. I'm not here to cause trouble. Then you should leave. Ray stepped closer, and Vernon could smell his aftershave. Expensive, sharp. Claudia's done fine without you. Town's done fine without you. Go back to your hotels and your deals. The door opened again. Cold air rushed in. Vernon didn't turn, but he heard Earl say, Morning, Marty. Footsteps approached. Marty Keller, older than Vernon by 5 years, thinner now, but still solid in his canvas barn coat, placed a hand on Vernon's shoulder. Ray, Marty said evenly. This conversation over? Ray looked at Marty, then back at Vernon. For now. He turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. The diner exhaled. Conversations resumed, quieter. Marty gestured to a booth in the back. Come on. They sat across from each other, Vernon's coffee cooling between them. Marty pulled a manila folder from inside his coat, opened it flat on the table. The deed Vernon had left for Claudia sat on top. Where'd you get that? Vernon asked. Beth brought it to Claudia's office this morning. Claudia called me an hour ago, asked me to look at it. Marty adjusted his glasses. She wants to know what you're playing at. I'm not playing. Then explain. Marty tapped the deed. These parcels, lots 14 through 18, that's Eleanor Landry's old property, Claudia's mother's land. Vernon nodded. Marty pulled out another document, this one older, the paper yellowed at the edges. This is the original title from 2003. Eleanor Landry, sole owner, clean title, no liens. He set down a third paper. This is the foreclosure notice from 2004. First Trust Bank claiming Eleanor defaulted on a loan modification she signed in October of that year. She didn't sign it, Vernon said quietly. Marty looked up. How do you know? Because I spent 3 years tracking the paperwork. Eleanor's arthritis was so advanced by October 2004 she couldn't hold a pen. Her doctor documented it, but somehow her signature appears on a loan modification dated October 15th. The radiator in the corner hissed. A truck rumbled past outside, chains clanking on ice. Marty closed the folder slowly. You're telling me the bank forged her signature. I'm telling you someone did. And you have proof? I have the medical records. I have testimony from her physical therapist. I have the original loan documents that show no modification was ever discussed. Vernon leaned forward. Ray Dunbar was the loan officer who processed that foreclosure. Marty sat back. His face had gone very still. Vernon, if what you're saying is true, it's true. Then we're talking about fraud, criminal fraud, and if the bank foreclosed illegally, that means Claudia's mother never lost that land. It was stolen. I know. So you bought it back, piece by piece, for 3 years. Yes. Why didn't you tell her? Vernon looked down at his hands. They were weathered now, spotted with age, the hands of a man who'd built things but broken more. Because I didn't know if exposing it would help her or destroy her all over again. Because Ray Dunbar still runs this town. Because I was a coward. Marty pulled out a pen, wrote a date on his notepad. May 15th. Statute of limitations on fraud is 20 years in Tennessee, he said. Eleanor's foreclosure was finalized May 15, 2005. That gives us 90 days. Vernon felt the air leave his lungs. If we don't prove fraud by May 15th, Marty continued, the statute expires. The bank keeps the land legally, and Claudia never knows what really happened. Outside, ice began to fall, tapping against the window like small, insistent fingers. Ray Dunbar's face flashed through Vernon's mind. The smile, the threat. He knows, Vernon said. Ray knows what I'm doing. Then he's going to fight. Marty closed his folder. And he's going to make this ugly. Marty drove them to Miller's Creek in his old Ford, the heater rattling like loose bolts in a tin can. The roads were slick and the wipers scraped ice more than they cleared it. Vernon watched the gray world slide past, bare trees, frozen fields, farmhouses with smoke curling from chimneys. You fish much anymore? Marty asked. No. You should. They parked where the creek bent around a stand of pines. The water ran dark and fast, not quite frozen despite the cold. Marty opened the truck bed and pulled out 2 pairs of waders, tossing one to Vernon. We're not here to fish, Vernon said. We're here so you remember how to be patient. Marty sat on the tailgate, pulling on his boots. You want penance? I'll give you penance. They walked down to the water, boots crunching through crusted snow. The creek smelled of mud and wet stone, and somewhere upstream a branch cracked under the weight of ice. Marty waded in first, moving slow, reading the current. Vernon followed. The cold seeped through the waders at his knees where the rubber had worn thin. Marty reached into his vest and pulled out a small metal tin. Inside were dozens of fishing flies, tiny, intricate, each one hand-tied with thread and feather. He selected one, held it up to the flat winter light. Royal Coachman, Marty said. My father taught me to tie these when I was 12. Took me 6 months to get one that didn't fall apart in the water. Vernon said nothing. You know how many days you were married to Claudia? The question landed like a stone. Vernon looked at the creek, at the ice forming along the banks. I don't know. 15 years. Maybe 365 days, Marty interrupted. April 3rd, 1983 to April 2nd, 1984. That's your first year. The year you promised to love her in front of God and your families in this whole damn town. Vernon's throat tightened. Marty handed him the fly. You want to make this right? Tie 1 fly for every day of that first year. When you hit 365, you'll know what to do. Marty, I'm not asking. Marty pulled a small kit from his other pocket. Thread, hooks, feathers, a tiny vise. Patience, Vernon. That's what you never learned. You were always in a hurry. Hurry to Nashville, hurry to close the next deal, hurry to build the empire. He set the kit on a flat rock. Fly tying doesn't hurry. You rush, the thread breaks, you force it, the feather splits. The wind picked up and Vernon's eyes watered from the cold. Sit, Marty said, gesturing to a fallen log. Vernon sat. Marty opened the kit, showed him the components. Hook first, secure it in the vise, then thread, wrap it tight but not too tight. Feather comes last. Patience. Vernon's hands shook as he picked up the first hook. It was small, almost weightless. April 3rd, 1983, Marty said. That's your starting point. Date the first one. Vernon worked in silence. The thread slipped twice, the feather split on his first attempt. But slowly, clumsily, something began to take shape. A tiny thing, barely recognizable, but whole. When he finished, Marty handed him a small adhesive tag. Vernon wrote the date with a pencil stub. April 3rd, 1983. 364 more to go, Marty said. Vernon looked at the fly in his palm. It wasn't beautiful, but it existed. What do I do with them when I'm done? You'll know. The county clerk's office smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Marty approached the desk where a woman in her 50s sat typing, her fingers loud on the keyboard. Helen, Marty said, smiling. She looked up and her face softened. Marty Keller, haven't seen you in months. Been busy. He set a notarized request form on the desk. Need to pull some land survey records. 20 years back. Helen took the form, scanned it. Her expression shifted, something careful sliding into place. These are the Landry parcels. That's right. Someone else requested these last month. Marty leaned on the counter. Vernon stood behind him, hands in his coat pockets, listening. Who? Marty asked. Helen glanced toward the back offices, then lowered her voice. Ray Dunbar came in personally, said the bank needed them for an audit. She paused, said to destroy them after he reviewed them. The heating vent above them clicked on, blowing warm, stale air. Did you? Marty asked quietly. Helen held his gaze. I don't destroy public records, Marty. I don't care who asks. Marty smiled, a real smile this time. Good thing you don't. She stood, disappeared into the records room. They heard filing cabinets opening, papers shuffling. 5 minutes later, she returned with a folder thick enough to need 2 rubber bands. Survey maps, title transfers, loan documents, Helen said, setting it down. Everything from 2003 to 2005. She pushed it toward Marty. You didn't hear this from me, but Ray looked scared when he was here. Kept checking his phone. Scared of what? Of someone finding out what's in these papers. She tapped the folder. And Marty? Ray's secretary quit last week, Linda Vargas. Worked for him 15 years. She walked out crying, said she couldn't live with it anymore. Vernon stepped forward. Where is she now? Helen hesitated. Helen, Marty said gently. If something illegal happened. Knoxville. She moved back to be near her daughter. Helen wrote an address on a post-it note, handed it to Marty. She might talk to you, she might not, but she's the one who processed Eleanor Landry's loan. Marty took the note, folded it carefully into his wallet. Thank you. Helen sat back down, resumed typing as if they'd never spoken, but as they turned to leave, she said, Marty? He looked back. Ray Dunbar's afraid of you now. Don't let him stop being afraid. Outside, the sky had darkened to charcoal. Sleet began to fall, tapping against their coats like tiny warnings. Vernon held the folder against his chest. We have a witness. Maybe, Marty said, if she'll talk. She'll talk? How do you know? Vernon looked at the address on the post-it, now visible in Marty's hand. Because people don't quit jobs they've held for 15 years unless their conscience won't let them sleep anymore. Marty nodded slowly, pulled out his phone. I'll call her tonight. They walked to the truck, and Vernon felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but possibility. Fragile, tentative, but real. Behind them, through the clerk's office window, Helen watched them go. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. The voice that answered was Ray Dunbar's. They were just here, she said softly. They know about Linda. Tommy Hayes stood in his kitchen staring at the certified letter on the table. The envelope was torn, where he'd ripped it open too fast, and now the words blurred together as he read them for the 3rd time. Notice of accelerated foreclosure. Outstanding balance, $47,000 payment. Due, March 31st, 2025. Failure to remit full payment will result in immediate seizure of property. His wife Sarah had taken the kids to her mother's house for the week. She didn't know yet. He'd told her the bank was working with him on a payment plan, but there was no plan. There was only this letter and 37 days. He picked up his phone, scrolled to his mother's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. She'd help. He knew she would. She had money saved. Not a lot, but enough. She'd liquidated part of her retirement last year to help her business partner Beth through a rough quarter. She'd do it for him too, but then he'd be just another person taking from her, just like his father had. He dialed anyway. Claudia was reviewing a client portfolio when her phone rang. She saw Tommy's name and felt her stomach clench. Hey, sweetheart, she said, keeping her voice light. Mom. He sounded tired. You got a minute? She closed the folder, pushed her reading glasses up into her hair. Outside her office window, the town square was nearly empty. A few people hurried past with their heads down against the cold. Always. What's wrong? I got a letter from First Trust. They moved up my foreclosure date. Her hand tightened on the phone. Moved it up from when? It was supposed to be May 15th. Now it's March 31st. They want $47,000 in 37 days, or they take the farm. Claudia stood, walked to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, older than she felt, harder than she'd meant to become. That's not legal. They can't just accelerate without cause. Apparently they can. Something about a clause in the original loan agreement. Missed payments trigger an acceleration option. Papers rustled on his end. I missed 2 payments, Mom. October and November. I was waiting on a crop insurance payout that didn't come through until December. Why didn't you tell me? Silence. Tommy, because I'm 40 years old, he said quietly. I have 2 kids and a wife and a farm that's been in our family for 3 generations. I shouldn't need my mother to bail me out. That's not. And because Dad's back in town, and Beth told Sarah she saw his truck outside your house, and I didn't want you to think I was choosing sides or asking you to get involved in whatever mess he's making. Claudia pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Her breath fogged it. Your father has nothing to do with this. Doesn't he? Tommy's voice sharpened. First Trust is Ray Dunbar's bank. Ray and Dad hate each other, have since high school. And now Dad shows up after 5 years, and suddenly my foreclosure gets fast-tracked? She hadn't thought of that. I'll call Ray, she said. I'll find out what's happening. Mom, don't. I'll handle it. She grabbed her coat. Don't do anything. Don't sign anything. I'll call you tonight. She hung up before he could argue. Vernon was in his hotel room, fly number 43 in his hands, when Marty called. Linda Vargas agreed to talk, Marty said without preamble. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at my office. She's scared, but she'll do it. Vernon set the fly down carefully on the nightstand beside the others, each one tagged, each one a day he couldn't to take back. What did you tell her? The truth, that Eleanor Landry's daughter deserves to know what happened to her mother's land. Did you mention my name? No, but she asked if you were involved. She remembers you from before the divorce, said you used to come into the bank with Claudia. Vernon closed his eyes. The radiator knocked and hissed. What did you say? I said you were helping fund the investigation. That's all she needs to know right now. Marty, get some sleep, Vernon. Tomorrow we find out if we have a case. The line went dead. Vernon picked up fly 43 again, held it to the lamplight. The feather was crooked, the thread uneven, but it held together. He wrote the date on a tag, May 16, 1983, and set it with the others. 322 to go. The town square was nearly dark when Claudia found Vernon. He was sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, collar turned up against the wind, hands shoved in his pockets. She'd had driven past twice, telling herself to go home, before finally parking and walking over. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. Surprise flickered across his face, then caution. Claudia. She stopped 6 feet away. We need to talk. He started to stand. Don't, she said. Just sit. Answer my questions. He sank back down. Did you know Ray Dunbar accelerated Tommy's foreclosure? Vernon's face went still. When? Tommy got the notice today, March 31st deadline, $47,000. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking, so she crossed her arms. That's 5 weeks, Vernon. He had until May before. Now he has 5 weeks. I didn't know, but you're not surprised. He looked away, toward the courthouse steps where salt had been scattered but not shoveled. No. Why? She stepped closer. What? What did you do? What did you say to Ray that made him come after my son? I didn't say anything to Ray. Then what? Her voice rose despite herself. You show up, after 5 years of silence. You leave a deed on my porch, and suddenly everything falls apart? Tommy's losing his farm, Vernon, my grandson's home, and you expect me to believe it's coincidence? Vernon stood slowly, turned to face her. It's not coincidence. Ray knows what I'm doing. Which is what? Proving he committed fraud. The words hung between them, cold and heavy. Claudia stared at him. What are you talking about? The land on that deed, your mother's land. The bank didn't foreclose legally. Someone forged her signature on a loan modification. Ray Dunbar was the loan officer. I've been investigating it for 3 years. The wind picked up, scattering ice crystals across the pavement. Somewhere a car door slammed. You're lying, Claudia said, but her voice had lost its edge. I'm not. My mother signed those papers. You saw a signature, but your mother's arthritis was documented by her doctor. She couldn't hold a pen by October 2004. I have the medical records. Claudia took a step back. If that's true, why didn't you tell me? 3 years, Vernon. 3 years you've known this, and you never— Because I didn't know if exposing it would help you or destroy you all over again. His voice cracked. Because Ray Dunbar runs this town. Because I was afraid. Because I'm always afraid when it comes to you. She turned away, pressed her palms against her temples. Her mother's face flashed through her mind, pale and thin in that hospital bed, signing papers she swore she didn't understand, crying because the bank said there was no other choice. You should have told me. I know. You should have told me the day you found out. I know. She spun back toward him. And now Ray is punishing Tommy because you're trying to play hero. You think buying back my mother's land makes up for what you did? You think this— She gestured at the square, at the town, at the space between them. This makes you a good man. Vernon's face was pale in the streetlight. No, it doesn't make me good. It makes me late. 5 years late. 20 years late, he corrected quietly. I should have been there when your mother got sick. I should have looked at those papers. I should have stopped it then. Claudia felt tears rising and hated herself for it. Why are you doing this now? Because Tommy's future is more important than my pride. And because your mother deserved better than what they did to her. Behind them, the courthouse clock chimed 8. The sound echoed across the empty square. Ray will fight this, Claudia said. He won't let you expose him. I know. He'll come after you, after me, after Tommy. He already has. She looked at Vernon, really looked at him for the first time since he'd come back. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were the same. Still that particular shade of brown that used to make her feel safe. She didn't feel safe now. I can help Tommy, she said. I have money saved. So do I. I don't want your money. It's not about what you want. Vernon's voice was firm now. It's about what Tommy needs. And what he needs is time. Time to fight this foreclosure. Time to prove Ray's doing it as retaliation. Time to— To what? Sue the bank? You think Ray will just roll over? No, I think he'll fight dirty. I think he'll try to bury us in legal fees and delays and public humiliation. Vernon stepped closer. But I also think he's scared. People who aren't scared don't accelerate foreclosures out of spite. They don't need to. A car turned onto Main Street, headlights sweeping across them before disappearing. Claudia pulled her coat tighter. If you're wrong about the fraud, I'm not wrong. If you're wrong, Tommy loses everything, and I'll have wasted time and money chasing your conspiracy theory instead of just paying off his debt. Then pay it off, Vernon said. I'm not stopping you. But the statute of limitations expires May 15th. In 90 days, Ray gets away with it permanently. Your mother's land stays stolen, and Tommy will still be vulnerable to whatever Ray wants to do next. She hated that he was right, hated that she'd spent 5 years not thinking about him, not needing him, not wanting him, and now here he was, forcing her to choose between pride and protection. I need proof, she said finally. Real proof, not just your word. Marty's interviewing Ray's former secretary tomorrow. She processed your mother's loan. If she confirms the signature was forged, then what? We go to the police? The same police who play poker with Ray every Thursday? Vernon reached into his coat, pulled out a business card. Then we go to the state attorney general, and we do it before May 15th. Claudia took the card. It was Marty's, creased and worn. I didn't come back to hurt you, Vernon said quietly. I came back to fix what I should have fixed 20 years ago. Maybe that's selfish. Maybe it's too late, but it's the truth. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her car. She didn't throw the card away. Vernon wired the money at 6 in the morning from a bank branch in Knoxville. $47,000. The teller, a young woman with tired eyes, asked if he was sure. He signed the forms without answering. By 7, the transfer was complete. Tommy's account would show the funds by noon. Vernon had written no note, included no message. Just the payment, anonymous, routed through a third-party service that wouldn't show his name. He drove back to Hollow Ridge in silence, watching the sun climb over frozen fields. The heater in his truck rattled. His hands ached from tying flies the night before. He'd reached 68, working until his eyes burned and his fingers cramped, each one dated and tagged and lined up on the hotel dresser like tiny monuments to failure. He thought about calling Tommy, decided against it. Instead, he drove to the storage unit on the edge of town, the one he'd rented under his company's name 3 years ago. The lock was stiff from cold. Inside, the unit smelled of cardboard and dust and time. In the back corner, beneath a tarp and 2 boxes of old tax records, sat a tackle box. Green metal, rusted at the hinges, the paint chipped along the edges. A faded sticker on the lid read E. Landry, in looping cursive. Eleanor's handwriting, careful and elegant, from before the arthritis had twisted her hands. Vernon lifted it carefully. It was heavier than he remembered. Inside were old lures, tangled line, a folding knife with a bone handle. Things Eleanor had used when she took Claudia fishing at Miller's Creek back when Claudia was 10 and believed her mother could do anything. He'd saved it from the estate sale after Eleanor died. Claudia had been too grief-stricken to sort through her mother's belongings, so Vernon had gone alone, buying what he could, storing what mattered. The tackle box, a quilt, a box of letters, things he'd told himself he'd give back someday when the time was right. 20 years later, the time still wasn't right, but it was necessary. He closed the lid, carried it to his truck, and set it in the passenger seat like a fragile, breakable truth. Marty's office smelled of old books and coffee that had gone bitter on the burner. Vernon sat in the corner while Marty set up the video camera on a tripod, angling it toward the empty chair across the desk. "She'll be here in 10 minutes, Marty said, checking the frame. "Let me do the talking. You just observe." Vernon nodded. The tackle box sat on the floor between his feet. At 10, exactly, the door opened. Linda Vargas stepped in, and Vernon recognized her immediately. Older now, her hair gray instead of brown, but the same nervous energy, the same way she held her purse against her chest like a shield. She saw Vernon and stopped. "This is Vernon Hayes," Marty said gently. "He's funding the investigation, but I'll be asking the questions." Linda looked at Vernon for a long moment, then sat. Marty pressed record. "Ms. Vargas, thank you for coming. Can you state your name and your former position for the record?" "Linda Marie Vargas. I was a loan processor at First Trust Bank for 15 years. I resigned last month." "Why did you resign?" Her hands twisted the purse strap. "Because I couldn't live with it anymore." "With what?" "With what we did to Mrs. Landry." Her voice cracked. "With what Mr. Dunbar told me to do." Marty leaned forward. "Can you describe what happened?" Linda took a breath. In October 2004, Eleanor Landry was behind on her mortgage payments. She'd been sick, cancer treatments, and the bills were piling up. Mr. Dunbar told me to prepare a loan modification agreement. He said Mrs. Landry had agreed to the new terms over the phone. "Did she?" "I don't know. I never spoke to her." Linda's eyes filled. "Mr. Dunbar brought me the paperwork already signed. He said she'd signed it at home, had it notarized, and mailed it in, but something about the signature looked wrong. The letters were too smooth, too steady. Mrs. Landry's hands shook when she came into the bank. Everyone knew that." Vernon's chest tightened. "What did you do?" Marty asked. "I asked Mr. Dunbar about it. He said I was imagining things. He said if I questioned his judgment again, I'd be fired." She wiped her eyes. "So I processed the loan, and when Mrs. Landry defaulted 6 months later, I processed the foreclosure too, and I've had nightmares about it for 20 years. The radiator in the corner hissed. Outside, a truck rumbled past. "Ms. Vargas," Marty said quietly, "are you saying Ray Dunbar forged Eleanor Landry's signature on that loan modification?" Linda met his eyes. "I'm saying someone did, and Mr. Dunbar was the only person who had access to that document before I received it." Marty let the silence hold for 5 seconds. Then he stopped the recording. Linda stood on shaking legs. "Is that enough?" "It's enough to reopen the case," Marty said. "Thank you." She nodded, clutched her purse, and left without looking at Vernon. When the door closed, Marty turned to Vernon. "We have our smoking gun." Vernon picked up the tackle box, set it on the desk. "Then we need to tell Claudia." "You going to show her that?" Vernon looked at the box, at the sticker with her mother's name. "Not yet, but soon." Marty ejected the recording, held the small disc up to the light. "This changes everything." Outside, the sky had darkened. Sleep began to tap against the window. Vernon thought of Tommy, whose account now held $47,000 he didn't know how to explain. Thought of Claudia, who'd looked at him last night like he was a stranger. Thought of Ray Dunbar, who was probably already planning his next move. "No," Vernon said quietly. "This just makes him dangerous." Sunday morning, in the church parking lot smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust. Claudia stood beside her car, keys in hand, watching the congregation file out into the gray light. She'd sat in the back pew, barely listening to the sermon, her mind circling the same questions it had circled for 3 days. Tommy had called Friday night, voice tight with confusion. "Mom, the money showed up, all of it, 47,000, just there." "From who?" "I don't know. The bank said it came through a third-party service, anonymous." She'd known immediately. Vernon. Beth appeared at her elbow now, coat buttoned against the cold. "You okay?" "Fine. You've been standing here for 10 minutes. Claudia unlocked her car. "Just thinking." "About Vernon?" Before Claudia could answer, Earl crossed the parking lot toward them, his wife trailing behind. He nodded at Beth, then looked at Claudia with something like pity. "Claudia," he said carefully, "heard Vernon paid off Tommy's debt." She went still. "Where did you hear that?" "Ray mentioned it at the diner yesterday, said Vernon's trying to buy his way back into your good graces." Earl shifted his weight. "I just thought you should know people are talking." Claudia's jaw tightened. "Let them talk." "I'm just saying," Earl glanced at his wife, "you've done fine without him, real fine. You don't need him coming back here throwing money around like that fixes anything." Beth stepped forward. "Earl, maybe—" "He left you," Earl continued, voice rising slightly. "Left you and Tommy both. And now he shows up playing hero? That's not right, Claudia. That's manipulation." A few people nearby had stopped to listen. Claudia felt their eyes, felt the weight of their judgment and their sympathy and their gossip pressing in. "Vernon has his faults," she said quietly. "But so do I, and whatever's between us is between us." Earl's wife touched his arm. "Come on, honey." But Earl stayed planted. "You gonna let him buy his way back?" Claudia met his eyes. "No, Earl. I'm going to let my son keep his farm." She got in her car and drove away before anyone could say more. Beth followed her home, and they sat in Claudia's kitchen drinking tea that neither of them wanted. Through the window, the backyard lay dormant. Dead grass, bare trees, a bird feeder swinging empty in the wind. "Earl's an idiot," Beth said. "Earl's scared." Claudia wrapped her hands around the bone china cup. "They all are. Vernon represents something they don't understand. Money, power, the world beyond Hollow Ridge." "You don't believe that." "I don't know what I believe." She set the cup down. "Vernon paid Tommy's debt, $47,000. Just paid it, like it was nothing. Maybe for him it is nothing. That's what bothers me." Claudia stood, paced to the window. "What if Earl's right? What if this is just Vernon trying to buy forgiveness, throw enough money at the problem until I forget what he did?" Beth was quiet for a moment, then, "Do you want to forget?" "No." "Then you won't." Beth joined her at the window. "But, Claudia, whatever Vernon's doing with that land deed, with Ray, with the bank, it's bigger than just guilt. I've seen the way he looks when Marty talks about your mother's case. That's not manipulation, that's something else." "What?" "Justice, maybe, or penance." Beth touched her shoulder. "Let him finish whatever this is, then decide if you want him gone." Marty's office phone rang just after noon. He answered, listened, then gestured urgently for Vernon to come closer. "Say that again," Marty said into the receiver. Vernon could hear a woman's voice on the other end, tinny and rushed. "Helen, from the clerk's office," Marty mouthed to Vernon, then into the phone. "When did he file it?" More talking. Marty's expression darkened. "Thank you, Helen. I owe you." He hung up, immediately dialing another number. "What happened?" Vernon asked. "Ray just filed a defamation suit. Against you, against me. Claims we're spreading false allegations to damage his reputation and the bank's standing." Marty put the phone on speaker as it rang. "He's asking for $2 million in damages and an emergency injunction to stop us from discussing the Landry case publicly." Vernon felt his stomach drop. "Can he do that?" "He can try, but—" Marty's call connected. "Judge Morrison, Marty Keller. I need to talk to you about an emergency filing that just came across your desk." The voice on the other end was gravelly, old. "The Dunbar suit? Already read it. Sounds serious, Marty." "It's retaliation, Your Honor. We have new evidence in the Landry fraud case. Ray's trying to bury it." "What evidence?" "Testimony from his former secretary. She'll testify he forged documents. We have it on video." Silence. Then, Send me the deposition. I'll review it this week. But Marty, if you're wrong about this, Ray will own your practice. I'm not wrong. Then prove it. Court date is set for March 20th. Don't be late. The line went dead. Marty sat back, ran a hand through his thinning hair. March 20th. That's 2 weeks. Vernon looked at the calendar on the wall. And the statute of limitations expires May 15th, 2 months after that. Which means, if we lose in court, we don't have time to appeal before the statute runs out. Marty pulled the video disc from his desk drawer, held it like a fragile, dangerous thing. This is our only shot. Outside, the sleet had turned to rain. It drummed against the roof, steady and relentless. Vernon thought of Claudia, standing in the church parking lot, defending him to Earl, even though she had every reason not to. Thought of Tommy, whose farm was safe for now, but whose future still hung on a 20-year-old lie. Thought of Linda Vargas, who'd carried her guilt for 2 decades and finally spoken. We won't lose, Vernon said. Marty looked at him. How do you know? Because Ray's afraid, and people who are afraid make mistakes. The rain fell harder, and somewhere in Hollow Ridge, Ray Dunbar was planning his defense. But for the first time in 5 years, Vernon wasn't running. He was standing his ground. Vernon sat on the fallen log at Miller's Creek, fly number 287 in his hand, and couldn't finish it. The thread lay loose on the hook. The feather waited. His hands simply stopped moving. Behind him, Marty waited in the shallows, casting his line with the easy rhythm of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. The water moved fast here, dark and cold, not quite thawed, despite the fact that March had turned the snow to mud and the ice to slush. Vernon set the fly down on the tackle box beside him, Eleanor's box, which he'd been using to store his work. 287 flies, each one dated, each one a day he hadn't been there. Can't finish? Marty called from the creek. Vernon didn't answer. Marty reeled in, waded back to shore, his boots squelched in the mud. He sat beside Vernon on the log, and for a while neither of them spoke. The creek filled the silence, water over stone, a sound like breathing. What's wrong? Marty asked finally. Vernon picked up the incomplete fly, turned it in his fingers. What if this isn't about justice? What else would it be about? Proving I'm not the villain. Vernon's voice was quiet. Proving to Claudia that I'm worth something, that I can fix things, that I'm not just the man who left. Marty pulled out his own tackle box, selected a fly, examined it against the flat afternoon light. You think those are mutually exclusive? I think I've spent 3 years telling myself I'm doing this for her, for Tommy, for Eleanor's memory. Vernon set the fly down again. But what if I'm just doing it for me? What if exposing Ray is just another way to make myself feel important? A crow called from somewhere in the pines. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. Vernon, Marty said slowly, do you remember what you told me when you first showed me that deed? When you explained what you'd found? Vernon shook his head. You said they stole from her when she was dying. They took her land while she was too sick to fight back. And Claudia never knew. She spent 20 years thinking her mother failed, when the truth is, the system failed her mother. Marty looked at him. That's not ego talking. That's anger, righteous anger. Doesn't make it pure. Nothing's pure. Marty set his fly aside. You think I took this case because I'm some saint? I'm 72 years old, Vernon. I've been practicing small-town law for 40 years, and the biggest case I ever won was a property dispute over a fence line. This is my chance to matter, to take down someone who's been untouchable my whole career. Vernon looked at him, surprised. So yeah, Marty continued, maybe you're doing this partly for yourself. Maybe you want Claudia's forgiveness. Maybe you want to feel like a good man before you die. He picked up the incomplete fly, studied it. But you're also doing it because it's true. Because Ray did forge those documents. Because Eleanor's land was stolen. And because if we don't stop it now, he'll do it to someone else. Vernon took the fly back, stared at it. What if Claudia never forgives me anyway? Then she doesn't. What if exposing all this just hurts her more, makes her relive her mother's death, drags her through a court case, turns the whole town against her? Then that's the price of the truth. Marty stood, brushed mud from his pants. But Vernon, you don't get to make that choice for her. You don't get to decide she's too fragile to handle it. That's the same mistake you made 20 years ago, thinking you knew what was best for her without asking. The words landed like stones. Vernon looked down at the tackle box. 287 flies, lined up in neat rows, each one a promise he was trying to keep to a marriage that no longer existed. "I stopped at 287, he said quietly. "Why?" "Because I don't know if I'm doing this for the right reasons anymore." Marty crouched in front of him, eye level. "Vernon, listen to me. You are the villain in Claudia's story. You left her. You chose your career. You missed Tommy's childhood. Those things are true, and no amount of flies or deeds or money changes them." Vernon's throat tightened. "But," Marty continued, "you can also be the person who stops a worse villain. You can be both things at once. Flawed and trying, guilty and doing good anyway." He stood. "Now pick up that hook and finish the fly. You've got 78 more to go, and we have a court date in 9 days. Vernon looked at the fly, at the loose thread waiting to be tied. "What if I finish all 365 and she still won't speak to me?" "Then you'll have 365 flies and a clear conscience." Marty picked up his rod, and that's more than most men get. He waded back into the creek, and Vernon sat alone with his doubt and his half-finished penance. The wind shifted. The smell of warming earth mixed with creek water, somewhere upstream, ice cracked, another piece of winter letting go. Vernon picked up the thread. His hands were steadier now. He wrapped the thread 3 times, secured the feather, trimmed the excess. The fly wasn't perfect, but it held. He wrote the date on a tag, December 15th, 1983, and set it with the others, 288, 77 to go. That night, in Marty's office, they prepared for court. The desk was covered in documents, surveys, loan applications, foreclosure notices, medical records. Linda's video deposition sat in the center, a small disc that held 20 years of truth. Tommy arrived at 8, still in his work clothes, smelling of diesel and cold air. He stood in the doorway, looking between Vernon and Marty. "I want to help," he said. Vernon looked up. "Tommy, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Tommy stepped inside, closed the door. "This isn't just about Grandma's land anymore. It's about Ray trying to take my farm. It's about him thinking he can bully our family because we're not powerful enough to fight back." He looked at Vernon. "I don't know if I forgive you yet for leaving, but I know I don't forgive Ray for what he's doing now." Marty gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need someone who can testify about the foreclosure acceleration. That's you." Tommy sat. Vernon watched his son, 40 years old, weathered from farm work, tired from carrying burdens he shouldn't have to carry, and felt something shift in his chest. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but purpose. "March 20th, Marty said, spreading a timeline across the desk. "Judge Morrison, we present Linda's testimony, the medical records proving Eleanor couldn't have signed, and the pattern of foreclosures Ray processed in 2004 and 2005, 12 properties, all elderly owners, all suspiciously similar circumstances." "Will that be enough?" Tommy asked. "It'll be enough to reopen the fraud investigation. But Ray will fight. He'll claim Linda's lying, that the medical records are inconclusive, that we're on a witch hunt." Vernon picked up a photograph from the pile. Eleanor Landry, taken at a church picnic in 2003. She was smiling, holding a fishing rod, Claudia beside her, younger and unbroken. "Then we make sure the judge sees her," Vernon said quietly. "Not as a case number, case. As a person Ray stole from." Marty nodded. "We'll need character witnesses, people who knew Eleanor, who saw her struggling toward the end." "I'll find them," Tommy said. They worked until midnight, building the case piece by piece. And when Tommy finally left, Vernon stayed behind, tying flies by lamplight while Marty reviewed depositions. 77 more, 9 days until court, 61 days until the statute expired. Vernon tied another fly, December 16th, 1983, and wondered if Claudia was awake too, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should trust him or walk away. Outside, the rain had stopped. The town was silent except for the distant sound of a train whistle cutting through the dark. Spring was coming, but winter wasn't done with them yet. The courthouse smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Vernon sat beside Marty at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded, his grandfather's surveyor's compass in his coat pocket like a talisman. The gallery behind them was full, Tommy in the front row, Beth beside him, townspeople scattered throughout, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. Ray Dunbar sat across the aisle with his lawyer, a woman from Nashville, in a suit that probably cost more than Vernon's truck. Ray's face was composed, calm, but his fingers drummed against the table edge. Tap, 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 and Vernon recognized the tell. fear disguised as confidence. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone stood. He was older than Vernon remembered, 80 if he was a day, but his eyes were sharp as he surveyed the room. "Be seated." His voice carried like gravel in a bucket. "We're here on the matter of Hayes and Keller versus Dunbar, defamation and counterclaim of fraud. Mr. Keller, you have new evidence to present?" Marty stood. "We do, Your Honor." For the next hour, Marty laid it out methodically. The medical records showing Eleanor's advanced arthritis. The loan modification with a signature too steady, too smooth. The testimony from Linda Vargas, played on a small screen, her voice shaking as she described what Ray had told her to do. Vernon watched the judge's face, watched Ray's lawyer take notes, watched Ray himself, who sat perfectly still except for those fingers tap, tap, tap. When the video ended, Ray's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, Ms. Vargas is a disgruntled former employee with a history of—" "I've read her employment record," Morrison interrupted. 15 years, exemplary performance reviews, no disciplinary actions. Sit down." She sat. Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Dunbar, you want to respond to these allegations?" Ray stood slowly. He'd aged well. Silver hair, expensive suit, the bearing of someone who'd never been questioned. "Your Honor, I processed hundreds of loans over my career. If there was an error in Mrs. Landry's paperwork, it was an honest mistake. I have no recollection of any impropriety. No recollection." Morrison looked at the documents in front of him. "Keller, you mentioned the pattern. 12 properties?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marty approached the bench with a folder. "All processed by Mr. Dunbar between 2004 and 2005. All elderly owners. All resulted in foreclosures within 6 months of loan modifications." He spread the documents on the judge's desk. Vernon could see them from where he sat, names and addresses, each one a life disrupted, a family displaced. Morrison studied them in silence. The courtroom was so quiet Vernon could hear the clock on the wall, each tick loud as a hammer. "Mr. Dunbar," Morrison said finally, "these are serious allegations." "They're unfounded." Ray's voice was steady, but sweat had appeared at his temples. "Your Honor, I've served this community for 40 years. My reputation, your reputation, is exactly what's on trial here." Morrison removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief. "I'm reopening the fraud investigation into the Landry foreclosure. I'm also ordering an audit of every loan you processed between 2003 and 2006. Ray's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, that's my ruling." Morrison looked at Ray. "If even one of these cases shows evidence of forgery or coercion, Mr. Dunbar, you'll face criminal charges. Do you understand?" Ray's fingers stopped drumming. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. We're adjourned." The gavel came down. The gallery erupted in whispers. Ray stood abruptly, pushed past his lawyer, and walked out through the side door without looking at anyone. Vernon let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Tommy leaned forward from the gallery, gripped Vernon's shoulder. "You did it." "We're not done yet," Marty said, packing his briefcase. "This just means the investigation's official. We still need to prove fraud beyond doubt before May 15th. But his eyes were bright, and Vernon knew what he wasn't saying. They'd won the first battle. Vernon didn't go back to his hotel. He drove to Miller's Creek, parked where the road turned to gravel, and walked down to the water with Eleanor's tackle box under his arm. The afternoon was warmer than it had been in weeks. The ice along the banks had melted completely, and the first green shoots were visible in the mud. Wild onion, maybe, or early crochet. The air smelled of thaw and possibility. He sat on the fallen log and opened the tackle box. 365 flies. Everyone dated. Everyone tied with hands that had learned patience slowly, painfully, one knot at a time. April 3rd, 1983 to April 2nd, 1984. The first year of his marriage, the year he'd promised forever, and meant it. Before ambition and distance and his own cowardice had turned those promises into lies. He picked up the first fly, held it to the light. It was crude, the thread uneven, the feather crooked, but it existed. He'd made it exist. The last fly, April 2nd, 1984, was better, neater, something approaching beauty. He closed the box, stood, and walked up the slope toward his truck. Claudia was leaning against his driver's side door. Vernon stopped, the tackle box suddenly heavy in his hands. She was dressed simply, jeans, a canvas coat, her hair pulled back. She looked tired. She looked like she'd been waiting. "I heard about court," she said. "Beth called." Vernon nodded, unable to speak. "Tommy told me about the flies." She gestured at the box. 365. One for every day. "Claudia, why?" Her voice wasn't angry, just curious, like she was trying to understand a language she'd forgotten. Why flies? Why this specific ritual? Vernon looked down at the box, at the sticker with her mother's initials. Marty told me to tie one for every day of our first year of marriage. He said when I finished, I'd know what to do. And do you? He met her eyes. Yes. What? Give them to you, in your mother's box, with every piece of evidence I've gathered about what Ray did to her. He took a breath. I can't give you back 5 years, Claudia. I can't give you back the time I wasted, or the promises I broke, but I can give you back what was stolen from your mother. I can give you the truth. Claudia's jaw tightened. She looked away, toward the creek, toward the trees greening slowly in the warming light. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly. I know. I don't know if I even want to. I know that too. She turned back to him. But Tommy needs his father, and my mother's memory needs justice, and her voice caught. I need to stop being so angry all the time. It's exhausting. Vernon took a step closer, held out the box. She took it. Her fingers brushed his, warm, solid, real. What happens now? She asked. Now we finish this. Together or separate, whatever you want, but we finish it. She opened the box. The flies caught the afternoon light, 365 tiny promises laid out in rows. She picked one up, read the date, April 3rd, 1983. Our wedding day, she whispered. The day I promised to be better than I was. She closed her hand around the fly. Vernon, these aren't going to fix us. I know. They're not going to erase what you did. I know. But, she looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. They're a start. Behind them, the creek moved on, indifferent to human pain, indifferent to human hope. A bird called, a cardinal, bright red against the gray-green trees. Come to my house tonight, Claudia said. Bring Marty. We have paperwork to sign. Property transfers, power of attorney for the fraud case, everything needed to file before the deadline. She paused. And Vernon, bring 2 teacups. I only have my mother's china set, and I'm not drinking alone anymore. She handed him back the box, turned, and walked to her car. Vernon stood there, watching her drive away, the tackle box in his hands, the weight of 365 days pressing against his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement, and maybe, in time, partnership. Spring rain began to fall, light, warm, washing the last of winter away. Ray Dunbar was arraigned on 4 counts of fraud on a Tuesday morning in April. The courtroom was less crowded this time, just the necessary people, the lawyers, a few reporters from Knoxville who'd caught wind of the story. Vernon sat in the back and watched Ray stand before the judge, hands at his sides, face carefully blank. The audit had found what Marty suspected. 12 properties, 12 elderly owners, 12 signatures that didn't quite match the handwriting samples on file. Eleanor Landry's case had opened a door, and behind it was 2 decades of theft disguised as banking. Ray's bail was set at $200,000. He paid it without flinching. As he left the courthouse, he looked directly at Vernon. No anger in his eyes, just something like exhaustion. Vernon didn't look away. 3 weeks later, the county clerk recorded the property transfers. Lots 14 through 18, Riverside parcels, returned to the Landry estate. Claudia signed the documents with Vernon beside her, their hands not touching but close, separated by inches and years and choices neither could undo. Tommy stood witness, Beth notarized. Marty kept the official copies for the file. When it was done, Claudia folded her copy carefully and placed it in her purse, the same purse she'd carried the day Vernon left, though neither of them mentioned it. Tommy, she said, the land's yours when I'm gone. Do with it what you think is right. Tommy hugged her, and over his shoulder Claudia's eyes met Vernon's. Thank you, she mouthed. Vernon nodded. Earl brought Vernon coffee at the diner the following Saturday, set it directly in his hands instead of sliding it down the counter. No words, just a nod of acknowledgement. Small things, slow things. The town, adjusting to the truth the way a body adjusts to a wound. Painful, gradual, but healing. May 20th arrived warm and bright. Vernon drove to Tommy's farm in the early morning, the surveyor's compass on the seat beside him. Claudia's car was already there when he pulled up, parked near the barn. Tommy met him at the fence. Mom's out back. She brought saplings. Saplings? Oak trees. Said if we're reclaiming Grandma's land, we should plant something that'll outlive us. Vernon followed him around the barn to where the reclaimed property stretched green and open. Claudia stood near the fence line, 24 young oak trees in burlap sacks arranged at her feet. She wore work gloves and old jeans, her hair tied back, and she looked up when she heard them approach. "You're late," she said. "Traffic," Vernon lied. Tommy's kids, 8 and 6, ran past chasing a dog, their laughter high and bright. Sarah called to them from the porch to be careful near the fence. Vernon pulled the compass from his pocket, knelt in the grass, and oriented it east. The needle swung, settled, pointed true. "Here," he said, marking the first spot with a stick. They worked in silence mostly, the 3 of them, digging holes, setting saplings, packing soil around roots. The earth smelled rich and alive, warmed by sun, softened by spring rain. Birds called from the tree line. Tommy's kids brought water in a plastic bucket, sloshing it as they walked. By noon, all 24 trees were planted in neat rows, stakes driven beside each one, the compass guiding every measurement. Claudia straightened, pulled off her gloves, and looked at what they'd made. "Mom would have liked this." "She would have loved it," Tommy corrected. Vernon cleaned the compass with his shirt tail, set it on a fence post where the sun caught the brass. "She would have been proud of you, Claudia, of what you built, of who you became." Claudia looked at him for a long moment. "I know." Sarah brought out iced tea in mason jars, and they sat on the porch steps drinking it while Tommy's kids played among the saplings. The farm stretched out before them, the land that had been stolen and returned, the trees that would grow tall long after they were gone, roots deeper than memory. "Vernon," Claudia said quietly, not looking at him, "I'm not ready to forgive you completely. I don't know if I ever will be." "I know. But I'm tired of carrying it alone. The anger, the hurt, all of it." She held out her hand. Vernon looked at it, weathered like his own, marked by time and work and survival. He took it, not as lovers, not as what they'd been, but as partners in the only thing that mattered now, the work of making something grow. They sat that way for a long time, watching the children play, watching the saplings sway slightly in the warm breeze, watching spring claim what winter had frozen. And when the sun began to sink toward the tree line, painting everything gold, Vernon thought about the 365 flies in Eleanor's tackle box, each one a day he couldn't take back. But this moment, this soil, this silence between them, this was something new, something earned, something that might, in time, become enough. Now, some folks in Hollow Ridge still ask if Vernon and Claudia got back together. Truth is, they didn't. And that's not a sad ending. See, forgiveness isn't always about going back. Sometimes it's about going forward. Different, but whole. Vernon learned you can't buy back time. But you can honor it, can't erase mistakes. But you can stop making new ones. Can't force someone to love you again. But you can show up, day after day, and prove you've changed by changing. Claudia learned that pride has its place, but so does letting someone stand beside you when the work is heavy. That being strong doesn't mean being alone. That some betrayals cut so deep the scars never fully fade, but scars are just proof you survived. And Tommy, he learned his parents were just people. Flawed, late, carrying their own wounds. But trying. God, they were trying. 6 months after the planting, Vernon still drove down from Knoxville every other weekend. He and Claudia would meet at the diner, drink coffee, talk about Tommy's kids, or the saplings, or the weather. Small things, careful things, building something new from the wreckage of what they'd been. They never held hands in public, never kissed, never spoke of love. But when the first oak saplings showed new growth that fall, Claudia called him at midnight just to say, "They made it through, all 24. Mom would be proud." And Vernon, sitting alone in his too-big house in Knoxville, said, "So would I." On Tommy's fence post, the surveyor's compass stayed where Vernon had left it, needle pointing east toward new beginnings. Eleanor's tackle box sat on Claudia's mantel, the flies catching afternoon light through lace curtains. And in the spring, when the dogwoods bloomed and the air turned soft and forgiving, you could see them sometimes, 2 people working side by side in Tommy's fields, planting, tending, building a legacy from reclaimed ground. Not lovers, not anymore, but something better. Partners in the patient work of growing things that would outlive them both.